type of presentation, and I want to acknowledge the hard work that's been done in the short time available to turn this from a hui ā-kanohi, which was going to be at the marae, to an online session. One thing I think is important to note, that the trustees believe that wherever possible and where safe, kanohi ki te kanohi engagement is preferable, but also making available connection by remote technology. Whether that's going to be possible or not in the next few weeks and months is out of our hands, but certainly that's the preference. We are working through now, if that wasn't possible, if it wasn't possible to meet in person with owners, how we can ensure that we move beyond just using a chat function and have engagement and interaction with owners at the subsequent hui. And it may even involve those who ask to have speaking time at part of our hui, to have the technology to be able to do that. So bear with us, and I congratulate the trustees and their team for getting this to this point under short notice. I'm just going to run quickly through the hui agenda for you. We will have a cultural and historical overview from our trustee Unuku as to the significance of the land. If we just put them all up, that would be helpful. We've done our preliminaries. I will just explain a little bit about the engagement hui process and what the trustees are hoping to achieve. That cultural and historical overview. There will be an update on the Court of Appeal decision, which was released recently. The trustees are going to discuss with owners their feeling around their guiding principles for the next steps and seek feedback from owners on those. There will be discussion around trustee rotation and elections. I think that's a very important issue that owners have raised. The Tumu development, that's the phrase being used by the Tauranga City Council for the development around your land and how that might impact on your whenua. So there's an update on that. And there's some options being put forward as to if the development was to incorporate TK14 land, how those infrastructure and active reserves and other housing needs and the like might be facilitated. And then I'm going to come back to me for a discussion on next steps, including what other hui might happen, and there will be other hui, and how you can be involved in that. Kia ora. So just to follow on for that overview of what the trustees are hoping to achieve by way of this engagement. It's intended that there be 4 engagement hui and this is the first, to provide owners with the opportunity to consider these proposals put forward by the trustees and provide feedback. And the 2 key topics that the trustees are wanting feedback on, but it's not limited to those. 1, the proposed trustee rotation and election policy that has been discussed today. And 2, the options for the development of the trust lands. And so we're at stage 1 here, hui number 1 today, which is to present that trust information and options. There's been a program of engagement that has been proposed, and I think this was put out under cover of a letter from your chairperson, that there would be 3 further engagement hui. Initially, as I said, they were going to be held at various marae around your rohe. We just need to monitor that carefully and see how we can react to the COVID situation. It may be that we have to remain online, but my intention is to assist the trust to ensure we have interaction with the owners at subsequent hui. Once the feedback process has evolved and duly considered by the trustees and as part of the trustee engagement with you over the next few hui, the intention is to develop a set of resolutions, both responding to your feedback and guiding how the trustees would see the next steps. Those resolutions are the formal resolutions that would be notified and would be taken to a formally notified hui for discussion, and also accompanying that, a postal vote. So what I think is trying to happen here is to make sure there is both inclusion of the owners, but also the broadest coverage as possible for those who may not be participating in the hui themselves. And the best way to achieve that is by way of postal vote. One of the critical aspects of that, of course, is for you as owners to help the trust to send in your postal details, even if you feel that the trust has those postal details accurate already, it would be lovely just to have a quick email or a chat as to your address that you would prefer to receive mail. For those of your whānau who you think may have shifted, the Trust would really appreciate all of you taking the effort to think, who amongst my whānau are owners and need to know about this? Does the Trust have their latest addresses? And please send those through. So it's a two-way street in terms of engagement. We're going to go to the next slide, please, which is the cultural and historical overview, and I invite Unuku to give a presentation.
Tēnā rā koutou, kei te mihi anō kia koutou. I'm going to do a historical overview. A lot of you will already know this, so please bear with me. Also, there's a caveat to this talk. If you are from Ngaitarangi, don't get too upset because of the history of this block, but a lot of us sitting around the table here are actually from Ngaitarangi as well, so we can beat ourselves up for that. I'm going to go right back to the actual the arrival of the Te Arawa canoe, and that's generally given as around 1350. Though in Māori terms, it's probably better to think about generations, 22 to 25 generations ago for most of us. 5 generations following the arrival, as they settled, moved out from Maketu to other areas, right out into the Moana Tauranga, especially Waitaha, Tapuika around the middle section, and the rest of Te Arawa based around Maketu, but generally over time heading inland to settle around the Rotorua Lakes. Originally, I guess you could say that the Te Arawa district or area went from Mount Mauao, Mount Maunganui, to beyond Pukahina, and then, as I just mentioned before, back around the Rotorua Lakes and its associated lakes. Unfortunately for one side, unfortunately for another side, the people of Te Rangi Hauhiri, now known as Ngaitarangi, moved in from the coast, the east coast, steadily towards Pukahina, and then from then tried to get along with Te Arawa, but in most situations like this, it went a bit wrong, and ended up in a major battle called Te Pōporo Huamea, whereby Maketu was taken over by Ngaitarangi. A lot of the people moved therefore inland, whilst the rest, Waitaha, who shortly afterwards lost Mauao through the Battle of Te Kōkōwai, moved around the Mount Otawa mountain, and Tapuika settled around the flanks of Rangiuru. I've already mentioned that Waitaha and Tapuika stayed near to the coast and tried to maintain a relatively uneasy peace with Ngaitarangi, who had firm control over the actual coast itself, though there was still access available for the people still in the area. But as time went on, many of the people from inland, from Rotorua, started to reassociate with their relations on the coast. And with the arrival of the Pākehā and the importance of trade and the making of money, a lot of people started to settle around Maketu. But unfortunately, there were a lot of wars going on at the time along the coast itself. The incursions of Ngāpuhi, who also got as far as Lake Rotorua, and then battles that started to increase between Waikato and the inland Te Arawa people. This spilt over to the coast, and Ngāti Haua, led by Te Waharoa, to gain revenge for a battle that had occurred in the killing of someone in Rotorua, sacked Maketu and killed Te Ngāhuru, one of the leading chiefs of Ngāti Whakaue at the time. And that meant that his relation, Kahawai from Ngāti Rangiuhi, got incensed, and he tried to get his relations to join him in to retake Maketu and to stake a blow at Ngaitarangi. So what he did is he went to his relations and stayed around Otawa Mountain and waited there until his cousin, Hikairo, and some other people from all the other tribes joined him. And gradually they joined together as a large war party. And then on the morning of the 23rd of April, 1836, attacked the pa of the Tumu. It was a full day battle. And at the end of it, Ngaitarangi, their forces fell and they were pushed along the beach towards Tauranga as far as the mouth of the Wairake stream, which is in not much of a stream now, but in the Papamoa domain. Since that time, up until the advent of the land court, there were a lot of little skirmishes, but essentially the border stayed, the frontier between the two tribes of Te Arawa and Ngaitarangi stayed at the mouth of the Wairake stream. And after Ngaitarangi's battles at Gate Pa and Taranga, where some Te Arawa fell as well, and the confiscation started by the colonial government, that frontier was maintained as the border between the two peoples. Now, what you have here in front of you is the early map that was presented at the first land court hearing in 1883. It's really difficult to see, so I'm hoping it'll front up a bit. I put down on the right-hand side a list of important places within the block that are certainly pertinent to what will become Te Tumu Kaituna 14. Over on the far left of the block, and you can see that line heading down from the letter A. A itself was a place called O Tumu Matawhero, and as it continues south towards the Kaituna River, it gets to a place called Te Kōpua, which was a pa that is of historical importance to Ngāti Wenuku Kōpako, but you'll see what happened to that shortly. As you follow the river heading towards Maketu, you can see another dark area. That's the Te Karaka Pa, which was the one that was mainly settled by Ngāti Rangiwehi, but also other people from Te Arawa. Further along, there's another one, which is Te Pāroa, which was the main settlement for Ngāti Whakaue on the block. The next dark area, we'll let that one go because its name is given 3 different names by 3 different witnesses. And then if you follow on the northern side of the river, there's a sort of a more, another square, not the one below the river, but above the river, and that's the actual site of the Tumu Pa itself. And you can see where the river hits up. Currently, the cut means that the Kaituna goes straight out to the ocean there instead of carrying on to Maketu, as you could see, as it was in those days. You bring that map out and okay. The only other places that I didn't mention in my talk was Te Kakari, which is actually out in that lot, which is now a long spit, or but now it's separated from the mainland. That were where the bird reserve is now at the moment. And then Papahi Kahawai, which is on the southern side of the river, which was a major landing place for Ngāti Rangiwehi and other people. Okay. On the 2nd of May, 1883, Te Tumu was awarded by the native land court, as it was known in that time, to Ngāti Tūnohopu and Ngāti Whakaue, who Ngāti Whakaue split and came in into 2 distinct groups to claim, as well as the 3 that are pertinent to us today, Ngāti Rangiwehi, Ngāti Wenuku Kōpako, and Ngāti Rangi Te Aorere. And the witnesses for those last 3 iwi were respectively Hori Te Rahoatua, who's the ancestor of the Clarks at Awaho and Manueka, Tāmati Hapimana, the Taikatos, the Holdens, many, many more, and Te Kiri Karamu, and of course you'd recognize that he was the ancestor of the Te Kiri family. Then what those various hapu do was drew up their list of shareholders, all the people within their various hapu, but some of them put in people through aroha. For instance, Whakaue in their blocks put in people from Tūhaurangi, Ngāti Pikiao. In the case of the blocks that we're going to be looking at, we Mihi Tarangi Kaheku put in some people of Ngāpuhi to show that the wars were over, and an important chief from Tūhaurangi, Ngāti Hinumi, Renata Ngāhana. But overall, overwhelmingly so, the actual shareholders were from the respective hapu. I'm being looked at, which means I have to hurry up. The next map shows what the section of the land block that was awarded to the three hapu, and that was on the far western side, left side, and you can see up the top there, not too clearly, but 1 was awarded to Uenuku Kōpako, 2 was awarded to Rangi Te Aorere, and 3 was awarded to Ngāti Rangiuhi. Okay, if you can just take that out again, please, and you can, thank you. No, back again, sorry. All right, on the, right. Okay, on the right, you can actually see what the partition sizes were. And what you may not be aware of is below the river, there was a continuation of 3 more blocks, 4, 5, and 6. And you could see that Rangiuhi as a whole was awarded 1,084 acres. Uenuku Kōpako received 509 acres, and Ngāti Rangi Te Aorere 327. Then the partition orders were put through on the 28th of August 1980, and when Te Tumu was broken into 12, and as I said, 1 to 6 were awarded to the 3 hapu. The witnesses at the partition hearing, Hori Te Rahawatua, returned to be the main witness, unfortunately dying 3 years later. Tamati Hapimana for Uenuku Kōpako, and there was a new one for Ngāti Rangi Te Aorere, Hemi Kōkiri, who happens to be the ancestor of the current chairperson of the trust. Unfortunately, 4, 5, and 6 were sold to the Crown, and that was 1,330 acres. So 70% of the land was sold off. And then finally, on the 27th of May, 1971, blocks 1, 2, and 3 were further partitioned, but eventually amalgamated, in 1971, as to Tumu Kaituna 14, except for a very small block, which was the Te Kōpua Pā site, which had been sold off from the Uenuku Kōpako block, which had turned into Te Tumu Kaituna 13. Just a quick overview, here we are in 2022, and you can see from the Māori Land Court map that Newdick's Beach figures importantly in the scheme of things here. But there is Kaituna 14 up at the top, some of the 3 other Te Tumu blocks that are still extant. And we have to be really grateful that through the grit and determination of our ancestors, not only in arriving here, but seeing their way through the various battles, at least we've got something in a physical form to commemorate that amazing history that we all share. Koina tāku I tēnei wā, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Unuku, me tō pukanga, e pāna ki te whenua nei, nō reira, kei te mihi. I noticed that there was comment around taking screenshots, which is absolutely fine in terms of owners doing that. Just to give you comfort that it's intended that this presentation be posted on the website and made available, so that will happen after this hui. I'm keeping a note of, as we are behind the scenes, of the questions, and some really good searching questions are coming through, which we will intend to respond. As some of my kōrero happens, I'll try to incorporate some of the answers for you as well. I want to assure you again that there will be a number of issues that get raised, and it's my intention that with the trustees we go through all of the questions after the presentation as well, and ensure that we can post answers to those questions up on the up on the Tumu Kaituna website. Again, balancing how much we can get through today and responding orally to all those questions is a challenge. I wanted to move now to the Court of Appeal decision. I was not involved in this decision as a lawyer. It just came in recently, but the Court of Appeal handed down its decision on the 17th of December 2021. So the decision itself dismissed the Trust's appeal. The Trust had appealed from the Māori Appellate Court. So just dealing with the first proposal that was the subject of the court decision, the Trust had proposed that in order to obtain finance to enable what it saw as an important development opportunity, it would seek to change the status of part of the land to facilitate funding. And of course, in that era, funding from general land was far more available than funding on Māori land. It was made clear there was no proposal as such to sell or to partition the land. And I think that had garnered a lot of objection from owners as to thinking that the change of status could facilitate the alienation of land. Rather, it was to retain the land, but to change part of its status. There's actually a really technical legal question involved as to the priority and how to do that in terms of changing the status when a separate title had not yet been issued. So the appeal was lodged to clarify that position. The Court of Appeal actually determined that the Māori Land Court does not have jurisdiction to make a status order or a change of status order which is conditional on the separate title being issued. In other words, you need to have a separate title first before you can change the status. So the legal position was clarified by the Court of Appeal. As it turns out, and during the course of the Court of Appeal hearing and subsequently, the political climate has changed considerably in terms of the government's funding opportunities. I think the Trust has explored further funding opportunities which will be discussed today. And it would appear that if a development like is being proposed was preferred by owners, was accepted by owners, then we would not actually require the change of status of the land. So some of the questions are, I think, premised on the fact that I'm seeing are premised on the fact that the previous trustee position is being brought forward into the new era, into this new presentation. My understanding is that this is essentially a clean slate, that the trustees are coming to this hui to present to you background and ideas, seeking feedback and engagement, and that no decisions have been made. In fact, trustees would not have the jurisdiction to make decisions unless they garner the appropriate owner support. So this is the purpose of these engagement hui, and the trustees look forward to receiving your feedback through that. The next agenda item is to go through the trustees' principles that they've established to sort of guide their decision making. Now, I wanted to just note that some of the questions are dealing with the issue of what's the order of priority here? Are you going to be focusing on trustee elections and then development opportunities, or the other way around? My understanding is that it is a tandem process. My advice certainly is that the trustee election process needs to be dealt with as a matter of urgency. And that the trustees are keen to proceed with that. But at the same time, they are the elected and appointed trustees on behalf of all the owners, and they have a duty to consider the development opportunities for the land. So I think it's appropriate that both of those items, which are important, are put on the table as part of seeking owner feedback. Okay. Malcolm, as chair, can I ask you to introduce this topic and to guide us through those slides with the assistance, I think, of Alex Wilson. Tēnā koe.
A very important opening question to be addressed here is the Trustee Guiding Principles for Tumu Kaituna 14. And under the headings, we have earmarked 7 points that should be discussed openly and except feedback on, and this is what we're looking for. Number one being that we are looking to develop the land without selling it. There are certain principles that have come into play now with the changing government scene and with the COVID development, et cetera, which has made some big changes. Secondly, we're ensuring that our history and cultural connection is represented and respected. And to do that, we are looking at, we say, at the shareholders' holiday park and an accompanying mini marae complex as a gathering place for those who holiday there or wish to visit at different times. The third point being housing for our people, talking with Kāinga Ora and others. Fourth, we have community spaces and places for the beneficial owners, which will be expanded upon. And fifthly, we have commercial opportunities for business beneficial owners. That is participating in the land development by uptake of leases in our so-called commercial areas, which we have quite a large area to facilitate that, and we would look forward to input from our beneficial owners. Sixth is the employment, education and training opportunities for beneficial owners, which we are looking to engage with on the whenua. And seventh, to create a sustainable income for beneficial owners who partake of those commercial opportunities that we would like to present on our whenua. So in answer to a lot of those, or to further expand on those, I'll call on Alexander Wilson. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Uncle Malcolm sort of outlined, I'll look to sort of expand on each of those principles in a bit more detail. But having a strong set of guidelines is important when undertaking sort of any project. These guidelines help sort of keep the purpose, the vision in the front of minds as the trustees sort of immerse themselves in the detail and the complex world of the development itself. It's even more important when undertaking a project for the benefit of collective owners and their uri who have had diverse backgrounds and interests, such as the trusts are doing into Tumu Kaituna 14, bearing in mind there is over 5,500 owners that they need to sort of consider. We all know how complicated things can get when you have to make decisions not just for yourselves but also for others. That is why the trust has designed this sort of framework or these principles to help guide them and keep them on track as they work towards this development opportunity of the whenua. While we know the trust must always retain ownership of the land, the challenge is also to find a way of generating sustainable income so that we can facilitate developments, work with the regulatory authorities, the neighbouring landowners, in order to sort of provide the maximum benefit to owners and their whānau. The vision is that the trust want to develop an area of the land and put in place a range of short, medium and long-term leases so we can retain ownership and still benefit from the whenua. We can then build, own and lease out the buildings, whether used for housing, industrial or commercial purposes. Some of the land, almost half, will be retained for ecological, environmental and archaeological and cultural purposes. As you can appreciate, developing our lands will be a complex process, but to keep us on track, we have created this framework made up of the 7 guiding principles, which we'll discuss with you now. So the first principle there is developing the land without selling it. This first principle, in accordance with the trustee and the owner's wishes, retention of the land is priority. However, as part of urbanisation and development of the land, the goal is to use the land to create sustainable income streams, and so part of it will be put into sort of long-term leases. There could be instances where an exchange of land interests may be required for infrastructure servicing. and the preference is to offset the encumbrance by way of increasing the overall trust land holdings, and this is via sort of land exchanges. Some of the land for roads may need to be alienated to enable housing to be delivered. So it's a bit of a give and take with this kind of point here. The trustees are doing this to allow for infrastructure for development of the block in the urban growth areas surrounding by Te Tumu. By doing this, they'll be able to sort of create community infrastructure so that we're able to have parks and reserves, commercial and industrial areas to stimulate sustainable employment opportunities, residential housing for owners and the wider community to build and rent, and primary and secondary schools, kura, punareo, to encourage education. Moving on to the second principle there, ensuring our history and cultural connection is represented. The Trust is very lucky to have some of the current trustees having a strong whakaaro Māori, whakapapa of the block, historical perspective, and to be able to sort of identify sites of significance. And some of this was highlighted by Uenuku in the earlier sort of presentation there. Ensuring the significant history and the cultural connection to the land is represented and respected within the development, it's important to all of us. So we've included in this principle to ensure the following initiatives are sort of taken into account. Protection of known historical, cultural and ecological sites within the block. Appropriate naming of roads, streets, parks, cycleways, reserves that include te reo Māori and recognises our history. And give priority preference to our own people for employment, advisory, commercial and personal participation within the lands. Moving on to our third principle, houses for our people. Being able to provide affordable housing for our beneficial owners and whānau is a key priority under this development. And while the development will include opportunities to build and rent for other members of the community, our goal is to see as many of our own people in these homes. As a result, we have started discussions with Crown Agency Kāinga Order to explore opportunities for ownerships and rental under this partnership agreement. The initiatives to explore, and the first one's noted in the presentation there, the build, own, operate, transfer model. This is where Kāinga Order will build, own and operate the affordable rental properties that cater for beneficial owners and the wider community on leasehold land, which will then be returned back to the Trust, say after a period of up to sort of 25 years. The second one is the build to own housing. This is likely to be a shared equity basis guaranteed by Kāinga Order and the Trust, and provide for a progressive home ownership fund as well. The next 2 points that we've got here, the community housing and transitional housing, these are models that we're already sort of seeing in the community at the moment. So those are sort of noted there, but under this guiding principle, houses for the people, those are some of the initiatives that the trustees are looking at. The fourth principle, the community spaces and places for beneficial owners. We know that building houses is not enough to ensure successful development, and that we need places and spaces for other uses to ensure a thriving community. On this basis, we recognise we must provide owners and their whānau access to use and connect with the whenua. We are proposing the following initiatives, and some of these might have been spoken about in sort of previous meeting of owners as well. But the holiday park and campground on the coast for priority use by our owners and their whānau, which is managed by the Trust or Trust appointed persons or entities. A cultural centre to show and highlight the substantive history and cultural aspects associated with the whenua. A boat storage facility adjacent to the Kaituna River for use by the owners and their whānau. And it's probably a good one with all the development that's happened on the river there, looks really good. And then parks and reserves that will cater for a range of ages and abilities. and sports grounds and facilities for the whole community there. Also riparian areas as well. Moving on to principle number 5, the commercial opportunities. I mean, in addition to the community facilities, the trust and trustees are sort of proposing to include land zoned for commercial activities, because these will help provide the cash flow and livelihoods for the development of the surrounding area through a variety of trade-based and service industry uses. We believe this will help create a range of opportunities for owners and their whānau to establish their own businesses. And we're willing to support this in the form of subsidised land leases, low interest rate loans, as well as some mentoring assistance once we have established and secured a good financial base for the trust. Moving on to principle number 6. Employment, education and training opportunities for beneficial owners. Building this development is going to take a huge commitment from us all. We are looking to work and partner with trades and employment training providers to develop a wide range of paid skills to owners and their whānau. This will enable you to help build this dream from the ground up and be rewarded along the way. Whether it's being a builder, a plumber, a landscaper, whatever role suits our people, we're committed to helping you achieve the dream so that you can help achieve our collective goal of using our whenua to support our whānau and their descendants. As a result, the 6th principle is to ensure our owners and their whānau have the benefits of employment opportunities throughout this development. With this point here too, the trustees are sort of actively seeking ideas and feedback from owners, and so we welcome that through feedback on the website and emails through, so we'll capture all of that. Now, the last principle there, the creation of sustainable income for beneficial owners. This underpins all of the other principles, and that is we are working to develop a sustainable income to help support our owners and their whānau and their descendants, essentially. We sort of noted in principle 1 that the vision was always be to retain ownership of the land, but we will be able to use it in a way that derives sustainable income so that we can reinvest those initiatives in ongoing urban development of the whenua for the benefit of our owners. And it's just to make sure that we supporting the generations to come. So on that basis, that sort of outlines the 7 principles that the trustees and the trust will be sort of guided by as we go through this development. The key thing here is nothing has been set in concrete or stone, and so we have to use this as a basis of moving forward. So ka pai, everyone. That's the conclusion of my presentation. I'll hand it back to you, Leo.
Okay. So there's a lot of material there, and again, this presentation will be available on the website. The guiding principles are specifically there as I understand it, prompts for your feedback. As I look through quite a lot of the feedback I'm seeing on the chat already, there's some really constructive questions being asked around how these opportunities might actually evolve in the future. And it's a balance here to ensure that we can respond to those questions, but also to really ask those who are thinking about this to put that feedback in a substantive way. So that might be by way of email or website posts or written kōrero. I'm also thinking some workshops would be handy to, I know that the owners out there will have expertise in this area as well and be able to feed back into these matters. I'm going to turn to the issue around trustee rotation and elections. Before getting into the detail there, just as far as I can, responding to some of the legal matters that have been raised and some of the questions. Again, thank you for those. There's a thread there I'm picking up from the questions around asking for details of the trustee's experience and commercial acumen. The idea, I think, is that if the trust is going to embark on a significant commercial development, can the owners have confidence that the trustees have the experience to be able to manage that process? I think and there are other questions of a similar nature around how they were elected and when and the like. What I'm going to suggest to trustees is that following this hui, we facilitate you to provide a little blurb about your background and your experience and have that posted up on the website. It may well be that that information is already available and I simply don't know about it, but I think it would be useful for the owners to see the range of experiences that you bring to the table. I also understand that behind the trustees, there is commercial experience in terms of your advisors. Some of them you'll hear from today, and that can give some comfort to the owners that you are getting the best advice in terms of the steps forward. And of course, the third aspect of that is looking at the trustee election process, which, as we'll go through shortly, would require trustees who are appointed to the trust to have particular experience and be able to outline that in the election process. So I think that's work in progress to provide that information to the owners about the current trustees, but also to hear from us today around the proposals for trustees rotating and being elected with skills that can guide the owners into the future. Before I turn to this one too, I just want to address an issue concerning the current number of trustees. My understanding is that the court order in 2018 vested the Tumu Kaituna 14 land in these 6 trustees. That's the legal position. There was an order from Judge Coxhead that an election occur because there was a trustee vacancy, and then, as I say, the land was vested in the 6 trustees. My understanding is that as the trustees then sought to put forward a variation to the trust deed to allow an election process to become manifest, that proposal to vary the trust deed was dismissed by the court because the suite of proposals that were put forward included things like the ability to change the status of the land and other changes to the trust deed did not reach the requisite support amongst the owners. And of course, that led to an appeal to the Māori Appellate Court and an appeal to the Court of Appeal. So actually, as the matter stands and I look at your trust order, there is still no explicit election process to guide that, and this is what we're going to be presenting to you today as a proposal. In a layman's terms, I understand the trustees to be saying, look, earlier variations of the trust deed that were put forward to owners didn't find support, and the Court of Appeal decision has put a lot of that to rest, but we're still left with this important issue of trustee elections, and they wish to progress that. And I checked with the trustees, and there was unanimous support for the fact that there be a rotation, so that there be fresh trustees coming on board, and that they have a very transparent and robust election process. So that's, I think, really positive. In terms of the postal vote question, which is one I just want to address too, there was a question: how can a postal vote occur if it's not explicitly provided for under the trust deed, which I think is a really good question. Under the recent amendments, especially in reacting to COVID requirements, the trust like this can seek directions from the Māori Land Court that its process of engagement, including issues such as the postal vote on important matters, could be the subject of sanction or approval from the Māori Land Court. And so there's 2 avenues of doing this. There is the proposal to obviously vary the trust order, which would be the subject of formal resolutions at the end of this engagement process. And hopefully those variations would find favour amongst owners, both in terms of the elections and the ability to conduct postal votes. In addition to that, the Māori Land Court and the Minister has the power to allow Māori land trusts and organisations to vary their engagement processes to make sure that they can take into account the COVID restrictions. So I personally am looking at those options now and to guide the trustees as to how to deal with this appropriately. I just want to put a flag out to owners: don't just engage with us on the substance of these options, but engage with us also on the proposed processes of engagement. if you're finding the engagement good and robust, if there are gaps, if there are further requests, all of that is really important to hear from you as well. Okay, can I ask for the slides to come up? This is the current proposal put forward by the trustees to, which would go into the trust deed itself to guide the election process and the rotation process, that there be 7 trustees elected for a period of 5 years each. Then every 2 years, you'd have a rotation system where 2 positions would be rotated. And many owners will be familiar with this in terms of other Māori land organisations. This is the way that it's moving now. You get a balance between institutional memory on the one hand, so that not everybody comes off at one election, but the balance of that is countered by the fresh voices coming in a rotation sense, and that's been put forward by the trustees as the best way forward. The current trustees would retire 2 at a time over the next 3 elections. The retiring trustees could well seek re-election, and that would depend on the election process that's applicable to all of those who are standing. There's a suggestion that those trustees who stand would be elected by a postal vote, and that the nominees should have this type of experience, either or really, that's set out in those bullet points there. Either be able to demonstrate 7 years experience in Māori land governance or administration or law or commerce or management, or to have an NZQA approved tertiary qualification on those matters. My understanding is that the reason for putting that in the alternative is that for many of the owners and those who are seeking to stand, you may not have achieved a qualification, and that doesn't mean that you should be prevented from contributing through your own experience and your connection to the whenua for the betterment of this Tumu Kaituna land. This type of criteria is, I think, an appropriate one. It may be set too high, and the trustees are keen to hear your views on that sort of criteria. Is that going to displace those who might otherwise be able to make a really important contribution? Is it the sort of idea that you support, but you can give further ideas as to how that could be refined? And inside the deed of trust rules and the election rules would be clear processes as to how that sort of information can be provided and scrutinised, so that when you as owners come to an election, you are aware of those who are standing and the nature of their experience. So can I just stress again, this is a proposal for trustee rotation elections that's been put to you for feedback. It's not a decision at all being made about that. And the idea would be to receive that feedback, refine the proposal, and bring it back for a formal resolution as part of this engagement process that we're working through. So it's definitely subject to the broad support of owners, and nothing gets varied in terms of your trust order unless the Māori Land Court approves that as well. All right. Having done the talking, I haven't been doing the reading, so I'll just make sure that questions that arise from that particular topic can be addressed as we work through. But just to keep our hui moving, I'm going to ask that we move now to an update on the Tumu development that's happening around your land. And to introduce that, Pirihira, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm actually going to ask Jeff Fletcher, who has been involved with us almost from the beginning of this development plan for Tumu Kaituna. He will have the information to hand, and I'm quite sure that you will get a very full report on where we are in terms of our development. Kia ora, Jeff.
Tēnā koe. Thank you, Piri. As you're all aware, there's been a lot of development progressing throughout Papamoa East over the last few years, and that continues at pace. What I propose to take you through today is where that's got to with regard to the Tumu Kaituna 14 block and the surrounding land interests. This first slide is quite an old slide, which just shows you the future proposals that were consulted on as part of the Tauranga Eastern Link proposal approximately 12 years ago. I'll move to the next slide. By way of visual context, as this slide says, it's identified as a draft structure plan. This plan is approximately 3 years old now. It hasn't progressed in that time, but it does identify, as was made public on the Tauranga City Council website, the overall land use pattern for Tumu. Those land uses identified several years ago for the trust block include commercial land, which is the purple land, a green area in the middle where it says landowner A, and that's a proposed active reserve, a school site on the east or right side of that active reserve, and then above that areas for housing, and those are the areas between the active reserve and the Wairake stream. So that just provides you some visual context as to the draft planning that has occurred. I'll take you to the next slide. So where the work on the plan change, which has been led by Tauranga City Council, has got to is there's been significant work done on land constraints, identification and mapping, and that includes everything from cultural sites to archaeological sites to biodiversity, high natural character, ecological landscape. So there's been substantive work done on that. And that is why, as Alex noted in his korero, there's approximately 50% of the entire area set aside to protect those aspects that have been identified not only on your block, but also on other blocks. There's been the high-level urban land use spatial planning, which is what you saw on the previous slide. There's been substantive work done on natural hazards. That includes tsunami, it includes flooding and rainfall events, it includes liquefaction, it includes coastal erosion and storm surge. All of those studies have indicated that the proposed urbanisation for Tumu is very viable and in fact very safe. There's been a substantive amount of work done on stormwater, including stormwater modelling, stormwater strategy, as this is a major part of any urban development. There's also been a lot of work done on transportation to try and address the need to get people into public transit, walking and cycling, and transportation corridors that cater for that in the future. And we'll come to that in a bit more detail shortly when we talk about infrastructure corridors. And lastly, there's been a lot of work done on landscape and visual assessments. And that's very critical to ensure that key view shafts are protected and are recognised through the planning that's occurred. Work streams that are to be finalised, tangata whenua consultation, that is due to be re-engaged with this year, as I understand it, from Tauranga City Council. The National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. There's been some issues raised through the policy statement that was released about 18 months ago with regard to how wetlands are identified and protected, and importantly for these types of areas, what sort of consenting pathways there are to deal with that. And I'd just like to note there are substantial wetlands already identified throughout the whole block that are protected. And then lastly, infrastructure, not lastly, second lastly, there's been a lot of infrastructure planning work, and that's been centred on water and wastewater and how that can be efficiently provided for the area and reticulated to appropriate facilities. Planning rules are being developed. They're in a very early phase now, but those are the key planning rules that enable urbanisation. And then lastly, open space planning and management, with over half of the entire area being set aside for open space. There's a lot of importance that's been put on how that's going to be managed and protected over time, and what sort of frameworks will be put in place. And there's some work that will be commencing on that this year. And very importantly and very pertinently, there's been discussions starting on infrastructure costings, and obviously the infrastructure to enable urbanisation of this area is substantive, and that work is ongoing and being led by Tauranga City Council. So in a nutshell, that's where the planning is at this stage. There's a lot of work that's been completed. There's still a lot of work to be completed. Tauranga City Council has got a team that is working on these work streams to be finalised. Their current thinking is there may be an opportunity to notify a plan change late this year, but that's not fixed in stone. It is a possibility. So we'll keep you informed as that progresses. We'll move to the next slide. As those of you who've regular travellers or even residents in Papamoa East, there's substantive development that is occurring down there. Importantly, Papamoa East Interchange is in the final phases of having funding applications approved by government to get that underway, and sometime this year they are looking to commence earthworks for that interchange. That interchange provides a direct link into the Trust block and into the Tumu area, but also into the proposed town centre that is going to be developed by Blue Haven adjacent to the Trust block. You'll see on the slide, and as Leo said, these slides will be posted on the website. There's a YouTube link that Blue Haven have done, which shows their planning. And this town centre is going to be a regional town centre, so it's going to be substantive. And I recommend everyone has a look at that YouTube video. And then this year, or late last year, the Rangiora Business Park work commenced with earthworks for the interchange onto the Tauranga Eastern Link, and subdivision works are due to commence for the first stage of that this year. So a lot of activity continues in the area, in and or around the Papamoa East area and adjacent to the block. Very importantly, as Alex and Leo mentioned, the Trust has been turning their mind to funding opportunities, and that in the environment, as Leo mentioned, has changed considerably. And these have been led by the Waikanga Waioranga $730 million fund to provide investment for increasing organisational capability and capacity to deliver Māori-led housing solutions, the delivery of new or upgraded infrastructure to increase the supply of build-ready land, and housing projects that will increase the supply of housing for Māori. On the block, there's approximately 1,500 residential dwellings that could be developed, if not more. So turning their mind to this, the trustees have prepared and lodged an expression of interest application with Te Puna Kokiri to fund a detailed business case for the feasibility of housing on Tumu Kaituna and to provide infrastructure for the housing. That's a significant opportunity to work with the government to get funding for the block and unlock housing opportunities for beneficial owners. And I think it's very important in reading the expression of interest guidelines that there is a clear intention there that these funds provide housing for Māori and for Trust beneficial owners.
Jeff, I'm just going to interrupt you there just to make sure that we've capturing some of the threads of the questions. There is a thread being asked around the work that apparently has started already, and you were referring to the Interchange Land. And can I just, through you, clarify, please? It's my understanding that there has been no work done on Tumu Kaituna land, and that would be subject to approval.
That's correct.
So the work that you're talking about is work that the Tauranga City Council are doing adjacent or next door to the Māori land.
That's correct.
Right. So when you're talking about opportunities, you are giving advice to the trustees as to if the owners were to agree with development opportunities, it would be how to sink in, how to manage the land in a way that is consistent with what is happening beside the land.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's to really, I suppose, take advantage of those opportunities to unlock the opportunities that have been identified through the Trustee Guiding Principles.
Right. If the owners were to resoundingly reject development of the land that is part of this process, it would seem to me that Tauranga City Council work would continue up to the boundary of the Māori land and be unable to continue beyond that.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. If you want to carry on now with your slides, I think you're at funding opportunities, and that's the context in which you are saying if the owners were to agree and this was to go forward, there are funding opportunities available that the trust could access.
That's exactly right.
Okay,
so
thank you.
As Leo has alluded to, very clearly there are substantive funding opportunities that have come up in the last few years, and these funding opportunities not only enable housing for Māori, they enable infrastructure and they enable housing generally. And I've touched on a few of these on this next slide. There's the progressive home ownership funding, and a lot of these are linked in with the Crown Agency Kāinga Ora, and what Kāinga Ora are looking for is support from other government agencies to progress funding, and that's to ensure that I suppose the anchors for housing are in place. So the infrastructure funding's availability, and then they can assist with the housing funding. In addition to that, Tauranga City is working very closely with government on the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund and the Housing Infrastructure Fund. Both of these funds are funds that the council has applied for the Tauranga Eastern Link, or the Papamoa East interchange on the Tauranga Eastern Link. And again, as Leo has clarified for you, that is not on the trust land, that's adjacent to the trust land. So they are proceeding with those initiatives to fund that key bit of infrastructure that will connect Papamoa East to the Tauranga Eastern Link. Lastly, the high-level infrastructure, and this is for what we call the network infrastructure, so the backbone infrastructure to fully develop the trust lands is approximately $80 million. That number's probably a couple of years old, but the trustees acknowledge that these costs will need to be funded by a range of funding sources and opportunities, and they are actively looking at any funding opportunities to unlock those funding sources. But there is a clear push from government to enable growth across the country, and particularly growth related to Māori land. The planning timeline is, as you can see on the slide in front of you, so we're currently at the very beginning of an owner engagement process with yourselves, with the beneficial owners, and that'll continue, as Leo has said, over a series of hui over the coming months. Those will lead to Māori Land Court applications subject to owner approval, and then a Tumu plan change by Tauranga City Council may be lodged late this year. If that occurs, the plan change process will take up to a couple of years. So the earliest development would commence anywhere within the Tumu area would be 2025 to 2026. So those are the timelines at present, as they have been for the last decade. They're still quite fluid. So that finishes the development update, and we can move to the next section.
Thank you. So just to segue then into this slide. My understanding from the comments that are coming through from some of the owners is that there is a cynicism, there's a doubt about the Tauranga City Council's motives. There is a cynicism around the Crown agencies that may be involved here. I am very experienced in this area and understand that coming through. I want to try and turn that into an invitation to you as owners to put forward feedback both on the proposals that the trustees are suggesting, which is essentially to work with the Tauranga City Council to develop your land in your best interests. In other words, take advantage of the processes that are happening on your boundary. But if there are viable alternatives to that that can achieve the type of objectives that the trustees have set out, I know that the trustees are keen to hear that from you. So it's about making sure that when you engage, you throw rocks by all means, but also put forward suggestions of what alternatives might happen. I know that I've come to this late. I know there'll be a lot of learning I have to do, but I have to say that in terms of my experience with Māori land, this block currently in its undeveloped state is sitting in the pathway of wider urban development. And I think it's really important that the trustees look at that context and decide to put forward options to you as to how to take advantage of that context that's happening. But there may well be other options. And I know that I encourage the trustees to be really open to hearing those. So can I just stress again, I understand clearly there have been no decisions made. There is an express preference from your trustees that you move forward with some options that would take advantage of that development, but they are very open and need to be open to other options that come forward. So by all means criticise, but also I invite you to put forward good alternatives that the trustees can assess. Annaru, I apologise because in my discussion of trustees, you were going to give a kōrero there, and I think it would be lovely for you to pick up the rākau, just in terms of any comments you have around both the trusteeship and previous trustees as well. Tēnā koe.
Ke te kaituna I rā ora. E kore au he te aroha ki ngā raukura ki uriru atu ki ngā tai amate. Ada a kia blauki, kia seso, ki te marae kura, ki te aho, kia Frank, kia Nikahere, a kia Keita, a kia Arthur. Nā rātou I whakatakoto te ara hei hiko ina mā tātou, e noho mai nei nā. No reira, a moi mai rā koutou, a moi mai rā koutou. Kei te ora tōni koutou I roto I ngā trustees e tau nei. Ka tapiri atu ki ngā pare kura ki pāngia I te tākiri o te waka nei o te toko rua a ngā tipiki au I Lawrence. I te whānau Fitso, I a Jesse, ka tai atu ki tuarangi kia Neo, kia hine mihi, ki te whānau Winara, kia mātou arangi wewi kia Ena, kia ria one. No reira koutou katoa, a moi mai, a moi mai, a moi mai rā. Ka huri ki a tātou e tau nei, a rātou ki a rātou, a tātou ki a tātou, kia pita ki te pai ao ki te ao mārama. I suppose the general gist of this story is Pauda's kōrero. To understand the present, we must first understand the past. Circumstances of today were shaped by the events of yesterday, and to predict where we're going tomorrow, that's why we're having this kōrero today. I suppose first and foremost, for us it was important to acknowledge those of our former members who the principles you heard is that they help shape. It is blokey, te kuia te aho, Frank Maika, Arthur, Nikahere Pirika, and Kaita. And then also Pia Tamahori was our secretary in those early days. Then also to acknowledge that the six of us that are here now, is that also Andy Rollston was with us. And I suppose this is what we've been having a look about the gist of the kōrero to understand the present. So Uinuku took us through the past. And then we arrive at where we are now and the process which we are engaging on, we look to our future. No data, a tēnā rā koutou, a tēnā rā koutou.
Tēnā koe, te rangatira. We're going into another topic. Just before we go there, I think it's good to just note as part of our process, we're capturing all of the questions. I'm really impressed by the feedback that's coming through, the extent of it. It's very hard to make sure we respond to all of the individual questions orally here. And I will be making a commitment to you as chair that we will be responding to these questions promptly and fully and posting those answers on the website. So if we're missing things, or if I'm missing things, I'll take ownership of that. We will not be missing them after this, and we'll be posting answers for you. I'm trying to pick up the key themes though as we work through and making sure that owners who are asking a series of questions along the same lines are able to hear some sort of response in the interim. One of the themes is, again, this order of priority. Do we deal with the trustee election process and the rotations and so forth prior to proposing development options? And I think I've addressed that earlier, that it's a tandem process because the trustees who are lawfully elected at the moment do have an obligation to put forward options to the owners for your consideration. But I'm also really hearing that there is a history here that needs to be dealt with around both the court applications and the extent of the trustee experience, and that needs to be addressed up front as well. So thank you for that feedback, and it's something that is going to be really important in terms of working through the process from here as far as the engagement goes. There have been some comments I see around not fairly constructive ones around Jeff himself. I just ask our comments to be constructive, please. Jeff is an advisor to the trust along with other advisors and is not a decision maker. There are suggestions of conflicts of interest and the like. And what I'm going to suggest, Jeff, is that we bring these questions into a theme for you to respond and for the trustees to put a response back. I know from my reading of the material that this was raised earlier in court decisions and was dismissed by the Māori Land Court. However, it remains a concern that some owners have expressed, and I'm going to give you that opportunity after this hui to respond in writing to that matter. Thank you, Anaru, for your kōrero. I'm going to ask Emily if you can introduce this next topic, and that's essentially if this development was to occur on your land, the council are obviously wanting infrastructure and this active reserve there, and your thoughts about that, and then we'll get into the details around it as well. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora. Kia ora rā te whānau katoa. My introduction is the infrastructure corridors and active reserve options and process. As a trustee, I've been involved with this kaupapa for many years because we've tried many different aspects of development, but never got anywhere. So with this one, I'm very excited about it because it's going to cover our mokopunas, our whānau katoa, and everyone in the future, because I know as a trustee and as an owner that there is a lack of housing around for our whānau katoa. And if we can do this on our block, it'll be beautiful, because then there'll be somewhere for our whānau to go, because there's a lot of homeless ones and everything out there too. And this is my view on this kaupapa, that I would love to see it happen in the future. Kia ora, and I would like to introduce Jeff Fletcher to do the kōrero on this kaupapa.
Kia ora, Emily. Thank you very much. So as Emily has mentioned, this next topic is on the infrastructure corridors and active reserve options and process. Now, just to provide some context to that, these infrastructure corridors comprise of two collector road corridors that need to go if the development proceeds through the block, and in turn the active reserve that is required to provide playing fields for the growth area. There's been a substantive amount of work done on how these could progress within the constraints or the opportunities, and I think it's the opportunities that need to be focused on with regard to the Trustee Guiding Principles. So to provide you some background context, there's two key collector road corridors. There's the Boulevard, and I'd like to just mention that these names haven't been fixed in place. They're names that apply to the west but won't apply to the east within the block. Their names yet to be determined. There's the Boulevard corridor, which is the northern corridor. There's the Teokoroa Drive corridor, which is the southern corridor, and then they're circled in the middle is the 20-hectare active reserve. Those two roading corridors comprise of approximately 10 hectares of land, and the active reserve is another 20. So the options that have been considered, and we'll move to the next slide, enable the Trustee Guiding Principles to be achieved. And in that context, they provide a key infrastructure that's required for housing and commercial development on the trust block. And they link the trust block to the wider transport network. It also enables government funding opportunities to be realised. So a lot of these funding opportunities are focused in very narrow areas, but if we can join up these funding opportunities to provide infrastructure, to provide housing, then they provide a unique opportunity to get some very good outcomes on the trust block. There's also the opportunity and provision of income streams through long-term land leases on the infrastructure corridors and active reserve. Moving to the next slide. So the options that have been considered, and these have been considered by the trustees over the last few months, include Tauranga City Council interest in these land areas, because these are corridors and land areas that the council would traditionally own. And so there's been a lot of work looking at how the land can be retained in the trust ownership, but the interests to enable infrastructure and reserve development are compensated for by council. So the first one is the interest for the land areas is enabled by easements and compensated for by way of transfer of TCC, that's Tauranga City Council surplus land titles, to Tumu Kaituna 14 Trust. So there is some surplus land adjacent to the trust block that could be considered by way of compensation for the interest in these corridors and in the active reserve. The second option is a variation on the first option, but it's a different option where there's actually a direct land exchange. The difference between these two options is yet to be determined financially, but it's likely to be a financial difference in itself. The first option achieves the Trustee Guiding Principles. The third option is the interest in the land areas is enabled by easements and financial compensation. So that's direct financial compensation for the interest as opposed to any land exchange interest. The fourth option is the creation of Maori roadways over the infrastructure corridors. The fifth option is long-term land leases over these corridors and over the active reserve, similar to what's been done at Mangatawa, Papamoa, where land was converted to general land, long-term land lease was put in place and then it was converted back to Maori freehold title. The sixth option is a straight long-term land lease greater than 52 years. And the seventh option is covenants in favour of Tauranga City Council over the infrastructure corridors. So there's been a lot of work put into these, and I'll try and summarise these very succinctly in the time we've got, with pros and cons, as you can see on this table. The first option, which is the interest in the land by way and compensation for that interest by way of surplus land, that achieves the key guiding principle of retention of land. There are some operational considerations to be worked through, but at this stage, they do not appear to be any fatal flaws with that. Those predominantly centre around Health and Safety Act considerations. The second option, the con for that, or the negative for that, is that the land is not retained. Now, we wanted to put all these up here, or the trustees wanted to put all these options up here, so you can see there's a process that's been gone through. So there's a clear process to understand what would work potentially and what would potentially not work. The third option, which is the interest is compensated for by way of financial compensation, would enable the retention of the land corridors with financial compensation. There are some operational risks with that, predominantly around the tenure of infrastructure within those corridors, but that is still yet to be fully determined. The fourth option, which is Maori roadways over these corridors, again, there's some infrastructure tenure risks associated with that, which have not been explored with external infrastructure providers such as PowerCo, First Gas, and ultra-fast fibre. Long-term land lease is carried out in Mangatawa, Papamoa. That has a good example of what has been done nearby. This would require broad owner support, so that it would require your support to proceed with this, and obviously, as all these would do, Maori Land Court approval. Long-term land lease greater than 52 years. Again, this has to have substantive owner support, with the number of owners in the block, that may be difficult to achieve. The last option, which is covenants, is probably the least preferable of all the options. Whilst it retains ownership of the land by the owners, it doesn't provide the same amount of financial outcome that the owners could achieve. So I know there's a lot to digest there. There's a lot to think about. As Leo has said, we invite your feedback on those options and your thoughts. But I'd like to stress the opportunities as opposed to the constraints with regard to these initiatives. So the process with regard to furthering those infrastructure corridors in the active reserve are obviously to engage with yourselves, as this is the beginning of, prepare formal resolutions in time, and then the beneficial owners vote on those formal resolutions in order to prepare applications to the court. So any of those options needs to go to the Maori Land Court. And a substantive amount of work has gone into exploring those options and unlocking opportunities for the trust. That finishes.
If you can stay there, because I'm watching some questions come through, and if I can just put a couple of questions to you, Jeff, while you're there. As we've said, in terms of some of the queries that have been asked about your own role, I'm going to give you that opportunity to respond in writing. I think that's only fair, and we should respond to that question. But it's about the forward block. The questions have been asked about this, and if we can just get the slide to go back to the colour plan, which is sort of the yellow, blue, when you're ready. So the forward block, as I understand it, is the block that sits adjacent to the Māori land. One more slide there, thank you. Some of the questions around, well, aren't we just benefiting the Ford group and not the Māori land? My understanding from the trustees' proposal here is that if we look at the plan there, it's definitely the case, isn't it, that the Tumu plan from the Tauranga City Council would end up developing the Ford land, which is further to the right, but it has a significant development of the Tumu Kaituna land. So it seems to be in a development right along that coast.
Yeah, firstly, in the context of where the land holdings sit, the slide on the screen, landowner A is the trust block, it's your block. Landowner B is a block that's currently owned by Tauranga City Council, which the Karis development group have the development rights on. Block owner F, which is the large block to the east or to the right, is the Ford block. So as you've mentioned, Leo, these infrastructure corridors clearly enable future development on those blocks.
Okay.
And all of those are considerations as far as the infrastructure corridors, the land exchange options and the compensation options.
So another question that flowed from that then, thanks Jeff, was if you're going to have infrastructure corridors that benefit others, why go through the Māori land? And I think that's an interesting question. When I look at the long area of coast there between the Awa and the Takutai, obviously the infrastructure corridors are proposed at least to traverse Māori land and open up not just opportunities for the Māori land, but also for other blocks. Do you want to just talk about that? Has the council looked at infrastructure corridors that would go right around, in other words, miss your land entirely and feed into the other land? What's the thinking as you understand it from that perspective?
So with the geographic constraints of the block by the river, by the Kaituna River, obviously by the ocean, the only other way to enter to Tumu for infrastructure is via a bridge link over the Kaituna River. And if you look to the bottom right-hand corner of the plan in front of you, you can see there's what's called the Kaituna Link, which is an indicative future bridge link. That is the only other opportunity to bring infrastructure in. I suppose the key constraint there that has been raised with council, and council have been asked to investigate that. The constraints that have been identified by council with that bridge link are numerous with regard to consenting challenges, but also with regard to where infrastructure is. So the infrastructure to service this entire area is all located to the west, and so that's water, wastewater infrastructure, and power and communications infrastructure is located to the west. That's not to say it could not come via this future Kaituna link, but that would take a significant amount of redirection of infrastructure, and it currently council's investigations that is not feasible to bring substantive infrastructure across a proposed bridge.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I think that it seems to me that the trustees are not just reacting to Tauranga City Council preferences, they're looking at options and the like, and that there are obviously benefits for a wide range of landowners through there. And part of the trustee principles were about what the benefits would be for the Māori land, even if others are benefiting. If we just look at the infrastructure corridors that are proposed, which look at traversing the Māori land, you've gone through a range of options, as I understand it, to look at how the Māori landowners can be compensated for that. And it seems to me that the key message you were giving, the trustees were giving through their retention principle, is that if land is going to be used by the Tauranga City Council and therefore the wider community to benefit the wider community, if your land is going to be used, you need to make sure that you are compensated completely adequately, but also that you are looking at opportunities to not that the council can use that land without acquiring it in terms of fee simple, without acquiring the legal title. And I just want to indicate to owners again, the disclaimer, I'm new to this, but I was really impressed by the way in which the council seemed to be actively open to options to use the infrastructure corridors without taking the land into their ownership. And that's quite rare. So for instance, if you're looking at easements over your Māori land, easements will not transfer the legal title. It's going to require a realistic view, I suppose, that the land would be used by others for a considerable period of time. But having dealt with so many cases in the past and seen the Waitangi Tribunal deal with, can you not consider other options that don't actually involve the alienation, the vesting of land in the council or in the Crown? And the trustees have told them this, and it looks to me like the preferred options are to not transfer any land for infrastructure except by way of easement corridors. And then the flip side of that seems to be that if you are going to get compensated, yes, by all means, financial compensation is a way forward, but looking at land exchange. So you actually end up increasing the land holdings of the Tumu Kaituna beyond where you have it currently. And so I encourage, again, owners to be giving feedback on that. If land exchange is and by that I mean, you might give an easement, but you might get back additional land that the Tauranga City Council has. That seems to me to be a good option to consider and look at in terms of the guiding principles. So is that a sort of a fair summary of where we're sitting, Jeff?
Yeah, that's very accurate, Leo. And as you've said, council is been very, very open to exploring with the trustees options that will retain land ownership in the trust. And these opportunities that I've touched on through those options are there to explore and to work through with owners to fully understand what they mean.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Can we go back to the slide then that Jeff was up to? Owners, we're at 10 to 12, and I know that many of us here and you probably too are keen for a break. There are a number of questions that are coming through. The intention was to have the hui from 10 through till 12, but I'm personally happy to extend that time a little bit to make sure that we are addressing matters that are coming up. And shortly I'm going to get Alex to just come up and make sure that we're capturing, or I am capturing, the key threads of the questions that need to be answered. I think, Alex, just given the sheer volume of comments that are coming through, we need to be dealing with these in a thematic way and really touching on the key concerns of trustees as we have, and allow the detail of the answers to come through in writing afterwards. So I'll just leave this slide up, which is next steps, and address that shortly. Thanks, Jeff. And ask you, Alex, now to come up before I get into next steps to make sure that we're capturing, or do you want to do it from there?
I'll do it. Yeah,
okay.
Hopefully my microphone's on now. So there's been a number of questions, and I've tried answering a lot of those questions directly, some of the easy ones, but the ones that I have sort of kept aside, I think the benefit of all owners kind of hearing some of these questions is probably important. I'll probably look to go through in a chronological order, Theo.
All good.
It's probably the easiest way of going about it. But we've had a question from Patricia Sutton. I would like to know how much so far has been spent by the trust on the proposed development cost. I can quickly answer this one, being the accountant. At the moment, the trust has capitalised about $2.5 million worth of development costs over the past, hard to say, 8 to 10 years. It's been a long time since we've been sort of capitalising costs. So that answers that question there. The next question that we've got is from Georgina. Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou trustees, me Leo. This is the first time all trustees have fronted up to the owners. My question to each of those trustees is, one, what commercial experience have you had, and would you put to the best position to make the necessary commercial decisions? The second question is, how long have you all been trustees, and what significant contributions have you been made? Are you prepared to sort of step aside?
So what I'm suggesting there, Alex, is, Georgina, thank you for that. And there have been other thematic questions along that line. You might have heard me earlier say that I was aware of those questions. Trustees, by all means, we can go through all of you and answer that. I would prefer, in the interest of time, that you be invited to provide that in writing. We will post it up on the website. I think it's an important question around your background and your experience, but I'm not going to open all that kōrero up for every trustee today. And if the answers that are put up on the website don't satisfy the owners and they want more, I will certainly be open to having that as a specific agenda item at our next hui.
Thanks, Leo. We've had a question from Levi. Whose idea and which trustees agreed to the owners could buy a plot in the holiday park that was proposed on TK14? I get the impression it's a bit of a speculation question.
I think if there have been proposals like that, I can assure you that from my understanding, everything is available for feedback and discussion, and no decisions have been made. So I'm not aware of a specific proposal in that regard. Probably it was if you've raised it, but this I'm trying to indicate is a clean slate for ideas. Trustees, okay with that answer? All right.
The next question's from Georgina, and Georgina, I'll try and sum this one up. There's quite a lot of information that you've written there. But how do the trustees sort of envisage managing a trustee election process while progressing a significant development proposed subject to owner support? There's reference to some of the court decisions in April 2021.
Right. So this is Georgina, this and other questions are really important. This is the order of priority point that I tried to address, Alex, that I think that a clear theme coming through is that you need to have trust in your trustees. There are those who are making comments that an election should be happening before any decisions are made. And I've expressed how I see that working, so we've dealt with that. I think that, again, a written answer to set that out, even for those who aren't on the call, on the online hui today, would be really appropriate, and I will do that.
Okay. And the next question from Karen Stowles is probably along those similar lines. The trust must put it to the owners if they wish to reduce the trustees to 6, and the trustees cannot make the decision for the owners. Will the trust be doing this first? I think that sort of...
Yes, I think that I answered that too around the current court order that vests the land in the 6 trustees, so it wasn't a trustee decision in that regard. But certainly, Karen and others, the issue of the trustee elections is paramount, and having that dealt with through the courts as well. So thank you for the feedback, and it's an absolute priority as evidenced by this presentation from the trustees today.
Next question is from Dr. Ken Kennedy. Why in recent years at Hui and Tamatakapua, Kanohi ki te Kanohi, that only the chair, Malcolm, has been in attendance with only 1 or 2 other trustees? Why have the other trustees not been available?
There's a couple of these questions around availability of trustees. There's a theme from some who are saying that trustees haven't fronted at previous hui. Is there a response that anyone would want to make just around that? You're all here today, and certainly it seems to me that that's your commitment going forward, that you would front to hui, but I don't want to be answering on your behalf. Malcolm, others? There was a question about previous trustee hui and why trustees haven't all appeared at the hui.
Well, we did have apologies for various reasons.
Right. Okay.
Would be my only answer.
Can I just get a confirmation that you're here fronting up and will do for the next hui, so that owners can be asking questions of you directly? All good? Good. Yeah.
As a trustee, I am prepared to do that and will endeavour to be present at every hui for our owners. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I've attended every session he's run here.
Good one. Okay. I understand, again, owners, that there is history here, so it's a matter of allowing you to express that, but also be looking forward as much as possible. So there's a bit of a balance here. If I'm not getting the balance right, I apologise. I don't want to be leading us all into historical issues, but I do want to make sure that those are tabled where we can answer them. Kia ora, Alex, can we carry on?
Ka pai. Next question's from Tarawhati. I am keen to understand the backgrounds of individual trustees, with us to understanding what tools and commercial acumen they have to assist in facilitating the success of TK14 and its owners. I'm concerned that we have appointed trustees based on owner historical whānau links, and I think it was mentioned that having a bit of a brief around the trustees being put on the website and communicated out
Sure.
there.
That's a slightly, yes, that's a good question too, but it also goes into another slight point around trustee. I'm hearing there, Tarawhati and others, a question around trustee representation of whānau and of hapu. And certainly that's been the way in which the trust representation has been structured, I think. I think it's a good question that we look at not just the commercial acumen and the management and experience and so forth, but in terms of electing trustees, how those seats will be filled so they are representative of the owners. So kia ora for that. And as I say, blurbs will go up on the website for you.
Kia ora. Next question's from Nahuia Te Awa Kōtuku. Trustees is about trust, yet how can we as owners trust people who have sat there for over 30 years and now have a tangled mess? I think you made the comment earlier, Leo, about owners having trust in their trustees as well. Might want to elaborate on that if...
That's critical, and the transparency is the way forward, and accountability through trustee election processes. So thank you for that, and that comment there, Ngahuia.
Ka pai. The next question is from Arthur Flintoff. Do you consider whānau first right of purchase of houses on leased land as a means of retaining our whenua? With rises in house prices, this could lead to a risk that whānau can never buy back.
So can I ask trustees about this? There's a suggestion that if you're going to be focusing on housing and you are going to retain the land within the trust ownership, how would the opportunity for whānau to actually purchase the houses happen? As I understand it, you're looking at options where houses may well be, and this is happening all around the country, houses may well be purchased, but the underlying land remains in trust ownership, and a concern there from Arthur around house prices. So in hearing your discussions, I was aware that you were thinking about how to manage this in a way that could achieve affordable housing for your whānau, but retain the land within trust ownership, yeah? Any comments that you want to make on that?
Tēnā koe, Arthur. You're quite right. Prices of housing is reaching the stars, and especially in an area like where Te Tumu Kaituna 14 is placed. One of the things that we have to look forward to, or trying to look forward to, is how do we leverage the other interests or people who could be housed on that land, whether it's through long-term lease or whatever. How can we leverage some money out of that to make sure that there's housing that's more affordable to our people? Otherwise, it could turn into a continuation of the rest of Papamoa. So that's definitely one of the things on the cards, that whilst the land is to be made available to all sorts of people, the people who should be benefiting the most are the actual descendants of the landholders.
While I've got you there, Unuku, we're just going to jump the sand question for a moment and come back to it, Alex. But there's the follow-up question from Paora. Is it the trust's intention that benefits of the development, including opportunities for housing, should be decided on the basis of shareholding? Which I thought was an interesting whakaaro, the idea of if there are going to be opportunities, how they may be allocated out to your whānau. I don't know if thought has been given to that yet, but I would encourage that to be a topic for us to think. Yeah. Do you want to just take it under advisement and think about it, or do you want to make any comments now?
You mean?
Well, the thing that's quite different about Māori land, in my opinion, is that it's not just about us now, It's about what happens later on with the next generations. And for a lot of people, sometimes their shareholdings are so small, if we put it just on that, then the benefits for them are really small, and yet they're still all uri of the original tupuna. So that is a fine balancing act that needs to be thought about. The other thing is that I don't think we want any alienation within hapu themselves by forcing people to aggregate their shares so that it becomes for the benefit of one and not the others. The other thing too, I think in the future, what will happen is people apply for leases and that. People don't always buy a house in order to die in it. They buy a house to enjoy a life for a while, and then other things happen. They may move to Australia. They might join Waratau up on the coast once he retires from Waikato. And so thinking about the housing, not in terms of being a house that you buy, you gain forever. It's about how do we open it up to those people who may have small shares and can still enjoy living in that place when the opportunity arises.
It's a hell of an issue, this one around allocation of housing. I've worked up and down the country with Māori land organisations trying to find the right balance. Sometimes if you do it solely on shareholding, you end up with increased fragmentation because whānau decide to split their shares up between their children in order to increase the opportunities to have houses allocated to them. And you end up almost reversing the idea of consolidation of land interests. There's another factor there is around how the whāngai policy might work. That's been a contentious one around the country. Life interests from spouses. So if an occupant who is an uri or a landowner passes away, how those life interests get handled. All of those are contentious. What if people are acquiring houses just for investment purposes and then renting on? What are the rules and restrictions around that? My understanding is that the Trust, through the expression of interest that they've put into the pot for the feasibility work, which has been funded by Te Puni Kōkiri, that feasibility looks at housing feasibility generally around the location of the houses and the like. And underlying that is a whole work stream that we would need to both put out and receive feedback on if housing is going to be promoted, how that housing policies and how it would be allocated can be handled well. So we invite feedback on that as well. I jumped over the sand question there from Moana Morgan there, Alex, sorry, and there are some other questions around the sand mining. Malcolm, can I ask you, there's just basically a question around, is the mining still occurring and how that might juggle or be handled in relation to future development opportunities that are being put forward here?
Certainly. Well, we're working with Stevenson's Aggregates here, who have taken over the sand mining from Patterson's of Matatā, and they are abiding by the rules, and they're strictly governed by Regional Council and Tauranga City Council. So the opportunity, I think they are extending the lease, I think it's got for 9 years or something like that, and then it's reviewed again whether it's renewed. They understand that we are looking at the development of the property, and if they can assist with infrastructure preparation as a remediating the sand works where the quarrying has taken place, it will be land fit for buildings or roading or whatever, and that is being undertaken through consultants, Oricon, who are monitoring that rehabilitation work to make sure that it's suitable for all types of development.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I think probably the other key point to sort of note too there, and within the proposed development and with the sand mining too, it is one of the key sort of revenue streams for the Trust at this present time.
Major.
So with the proposed development, and Jeff can sort of correct me if I'm wrong here, There's an active reserve that sort of identified that for that space there going forward into the future. And we talked about sort of long-term land lease options for that space there, and that will sort of cover the revenue stream, if you like, for the trust. We'll swap it out. We'll move on to some more questions that have come through. Another one sort of from Georgina, and quite an extensive one there as well. I think Georgina's just asking about getting in plain English why the status part of the land results in alienation. And I think there's reference made to sort of Whina Cooper about not one more land taken. And I think in some of the presentations we talked about some of the roadways, and this might be sort of a question for you, Jeff, as you sort of walk up, come and answer it. Again, we refer back to those guiding principles, I think, Leo. The preference is retention of land, but there will be instances we will have to, or the trustees will have to go through a negotiation process. Yeah. Sure.
Again, thematically, I'm seeing a number of these points. Georgina, you're probably speaking on behalf of others, a categorical opposition to the alienation of your land, as you cite, not 1 acre more. I saw the guiding principle there from the trustees, retention of your land, and I was hearing options there that would say that even if there was alienation in a technical sense by way of easements and the like, that should be compensated by way of increasing your land holdings by way of exchange land. So I'm certainly aware that your concerns are foremost in the trustees' minds as part of the presentation, and hopefully some of the presentation today has responded to those concerns that you and others have.
The next question is from Tarawhiti. His question, or her question, what is a tendering process to build these houses and commercial sites? Foreign entities must be cutting corners, and already envision a similar issue to the leaky buildings of the 1990s and 2000s. I could possibly start answering this question. And it goes back to sort of the guiding principles that preference will be given to owners that have businesses who are builders or who can help sort of facilitate some of that development, is probably answering some of that question. It's probably too early on in the piece to definitively answer that question at this point in time. Next question is from Karen Stowers. And I think you might have addressed this one too, Leo. Trustees, shouldn't you be dealing with a breach of trust order first before a clean slate can happen?
So yes, I think it's been addressed. The breach of trust question, so there were a number of allegations of breach of trust. The one that, and they were all dismissed except for one, which was in relation to the trustee election process. I've tried to stress how important that election process is. So this question and other thematic questions around dealing with the trustee elections and transparency issue, I'm hearing loud and clear, and we'll be providing feedback to the trustees around that for you and for others who are concerned about that. So kia ora, I think we've dealt with that.
Next question's from Fiona Waititi. In regards to the education, I would like to propose consideration for education financial support for owners, beneficiaries for part-time tertiary studies. Is this possible? Many of us require full-time employment and therefore can only commit to part-time study. I think it's probably more of a feedback question.
Yeah,
that one.
I think it's a great suggestion. What I'm thinking, Fiona and others who are putting forward ideas like this, it's just a simple yes, let's consider that. So this is the sort of feedback and proposals and options and opportunities that we need to hear. Also, on the earlier question around tendering, I think that's really important too, that, you know, if development is going to occur, how do owners and their whānau have access to employment opportunities as part of these companies doing work on your behalf? And we've got models around the country whereby the big companies, construction companies or whatever it may be, are required as part of their tendering to look to those who whakapapa and affiliate to the whenua as a matter of priority in terms of those opportunities.
Next question's from Auntie Josie Scott. Can we know how many owners are in this presentation? At the moment, we dropped down to 75, but at the peak, we got up to about 85, 86 people in there. Bearing in mind that it sounds like some people that are connecting in have houses with maybe 5 to 10 owners in there, so they're all coming together. So hopefully that answers that question. Next question is from Tarawhati again. Do the current trustees meet the proposed requirements? And I think that was...
We've addressed that.
Yep, we've addressed that one too. Next one from Paula Maxwell. I understand the principles of the trustee selection, but is it the proposal that the trustees step down and new trustees are selected?
Okay, and the response to that was set out in the slides, that there is a proposal that by way of rotation, the trustees step down and be eligible for re-election. I think there were some questions that were saying the trustees all must stand down immediately. I think that feedback has been received. The proposal, as I understand it from the trustees, is that they would go through a rotation of standing down so that you don't end up losing the institutional knowledge that's already around the table. But again, provide feedback on that, please.
Next question from Karen Stowers. Could the trust put to the owners first if they have faith in the present trustees and wish them to continue based on their past performance for the owners? Could this be a first step of trustee elections?
Okay, it's a question of priority as to what goes first. The trustees are putting forward development options along with options for trustee rotation and elections, Karen. And I hear your preference for that one happens before the other. And we're going to take that into consideration and look at what the next steps are.
Next question is from Rawari Bana. From the 10 people in our Zoom Hui room, there is widespread opposition to requirements regarding to needing the NZQA qualification or otherwise. Probably a feedback one.
Feedback, good.
Yep. Another question from Tarawhati. The structure is sound, however, I believe it may be too high for a large portion of owners, meaning we need to leave trustees in for 3 years as opposed to 2.
So just because you as trustees haven't been seeing all the questions, there have been some answers or feedback coming in. Firstly, that 5 years of a tenure is too long. Some are preferring 3. Secondly, that there be an increased period of years before you rotate. So instead of 2, 3. I think the easiest way to handle this, given the time that we've got, is to be receiving this feedback and other feedback on the trustee rotation process. Consider it and then repeat that feedback back to owners for the next Hui. So thank you for that comment.
Next question from Georgina. Must have very quick fingers, Georgina, typing very fast. But to try and sum it up, I think the basis of the question is why can the trustees not sit and wait for infrastructure developments to occur with the neighbours?
Yeah, so I saw that question, Georgina. I thought it was a really good one around alternatives and the idea of, look, put infrastructure around us, not over us, and then you can get that development. That's why I asked on your behalf, Jeff, to respond to that. He's given the options of the bridge down the other end of the land, and that this preferred option from Tauranga City Council is being tabled, and it's ready for the trustees to respond to that on your behalf to see if those are going to be opportunities for you and to get feedback from you on it. So thank you for the question around are there alternative options for this.
Next question again from Tarawhati. Can you please explain why work streams are being developed when the owners clearly have no buy-in on the suggested plans?
So Tarawhati's asking about why we're going through all these options when there's no buy-in. My understanding from you as trustees was that you felt it was important to put forward options for feedback. So the buy-in question is happening from this point onwards around that. I think Levi and others, obviously you're concerned. There have been some questions, trustees, around, well, this is just a repeat of what's happened previously, and previously we have said no to that. I just want to note that from my reading of the file, there was a concern about the level of owner engagement. And so I think the fact that some have objected to these proposals needs to be taken into account, but also the trustees are wanting to reach as wide as possible to the owners who haven't yet engaged. That's the first point. Secondly, it seems to me that there is a really clear message here that while the trustees are preferring some of these options, they're seeking feedback from you on it. And if it's a rejection of that, then that's what it is. And the third aspect, Levi and others, is that my understanding is that in key respects, these infrastructure corridor issues are quite different from what was put forward earlier. In other words, the idea of getting exchange land or not alienating any land at all to the council, but rather using easements and other instruments, those are all really important developments that have occurred since the previous engagement. So get on board, provide the feedback, and if it's still a rejection from your point of view, kei te pai.
I've just closed off a couple of questions that were sort of along those similar lines, so hopefully those, I won't read them out specifically, hopefully it closes them off. There's a question here from Renee Kiriona. Will our Pākehā neighbours, including the Fords, be giving up ownership of their land for the roads the council wants on their land? And short answer is yes. Georgina. Question is, why are you proposing development on land that provides infrastructure when there is more than enough development going on around?
So again, not cutting you off there, Alex. Georgina, I see further down that you're happy for a number of your questions to be answered in writing, so thanks for that. And you've put forward your email questions as well. So you're somebody who's obviously really involved in this and have many questions. In the interest of time and your own consent to some of these being answered in writing, we will do that. And it's a question that really goes to the heart of your, I think, teasing out, are there better options for the trust? So tēnā koe.
Question from Rawiri Bana, in regards to the due diligent work that has been undertaken in regards to the rising sea levels in the next 15 years, has this been modelled been taken into account? It's quite a specific question.
Really good question about climate change and sea rises. So Jeff had explained around the modelling that's been done in this area. My understanding from Jeff is asking him about this was that actually this area that's been proposed is some of the best along the coast for this development in terms of protection against sea rises. So great question. Climate change has to be the forefront of this development options. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Another question from Rawiri Bana. What are the objectives of the trustees? We should disregard the objectives of any external party, including Tauranga City Council, Caris, Ford, until we have our own objectives identified. If the trustees want to comment on that one.
So there's a question there. Are your objectives coming from you guys, or are you simply reacting to objectives from the council and others?
We formulated all this.
Yeah.
Tauranga has just come on the scene when we've required them. So no, this is our position. It always has been.
All right.
Question from Karen Stowers. Would the trust consider a development advisor who is experienced in Māori land development, who will put the owner's best interests first, and someone who is not involved with other developers in the neighbouring block, such as a Ford? Someone new and forward thinking who has clear understanding of tikanga Māori to start a clean slate.
So there's a suggestion there of a development advisor experienced in tikanga Māori to work with you. I think that that's a suggestion that comes forward, and you should take that into account as part of your advice. Yeah.
Pātai from Ngā Hui Te Awa Kōtuku. Option, if there is a mini marae, why not negotiate with a major tertiary provider and centres of research excellence to establish a campus on the site?
Great feedback.
So, probably a feedback question.
Great feedback. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe Ngā Hui. tino pai tēnā kōrero. Just to let you know, one of the things that Tāmati Hapimana, the person who, the main witness for Ngāti Wenuku Kōpako at both of the first hearing and then the partition hearing, was his dear wish that there would be a centre of education. Well, in those days, just call it a school, a kura, be established on the site. And whilst there's been a lot of talk about primary and secondary, what you're saying is an excellent idea, because there's so much about the land itself that needs to be, and its history that needs to be gone into in detail to understand better our relationship with the place. Kei te tino tautoko, pai rawa tērā patai. Patai, hari te patai e.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Next question from Karen Stowers. I think the question is around trustee elections and breach of trust. I think we've kind of addressed some of those questions. Rawari Bana, the consensus in our room is the election issue must be dealt with first. Nothing else can happen until then. I think probably similar to some of the other questions that have happened. Patricia Sutton, given the huge cost of development proposed, has there been any thought given to a more limited phase development, such as a retirement village in partnership with a company? This would limit our financial investment and would generate an income for further developments such as Papakainga.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Bit of feedback.
It might be the trustees retiring soon. So yes, excellent idea.
And I think that Patricia is getting to not just a suggestion of what it might be, but the idea of a phased development rather than. And my understanding was that this was actually a phased development that we were working through processes whereby a different development would come online. So I think, Jeff, what I would like is a more considered answer than I can give to that around the phasing of this. To make sure that the financial exposure of the trust, if this was to go ahead, can be managed and well looked after. Yeah. So thanks, Patricia. I'll just deal with the next one. Alex, can you please define Māori roadways? So this came up in the context of some of the options for land. If, for instance, the boulevard corridors were to be used by as part of this development, could you turn that into a Māori roadway? It's a tool available under Te Ture Whenua Māori, and it's quite down the line in terms of the options, the pros and cons. Essentially, it would be retained within your ownership. It would be managed by either this trust or a Māori roadway trust and would have a separate title on it. And then questions of maintenance obligations and the like come up. In my experience dealing with Māori roadways, you want to be as far away from ongoing maintenance obligations as possible and get the benefits of retaining the land without requiring you to be managing the costs in the future of managing those roadways. So it's certainly an option, but not one that's been favoured primarily.
Okay, fine. I'll ask the next question from Tarawhati again. Regarding these corridors, which pays the connection to the Ford block, do we have a confirmed plan for the Ford block? Ask in the interest of ensuring that any commercial build is not in conflict with the Ford family projects, whilst also ensuring that we are in conflict with them, meaning both they and us are benefiting.
Great. So I asked this question, Tarawhati, to Jeff because I saw this and other questions come forward around the Ford. The Fords are likely to benefit from this whole development, as is the Karis block, and that's been addressed. The wider questions of allegations of conflict of interest by Jeff, I have suggested that Jeff, in fairness, be given the opportunity to respond to those in writing, and he's going to do so.
Okay, fine. Next question from Rawari Bana. Does the Tauranga City Council, as minuted in the MLC hearing of 2 years ago, still see the use of the Public Works Act as an option to obtain some of our land for roading? Also with TCC under stat supervision, has the position of TCC changed? And in regard to the infrastructure options, that the option should always benefit the landowners the most. So surplus land, money, etc., the option should always benefit us first and foremost, not other interested parties.
That last bit is just something that the trustees are all nodding here, that should benefit your owners first. In terms of the Public Works Act, yes, that's always a go-to position if an agency doesn't get their way. But my sense from the work here is that the Tauranga City Council are very reluctant to talk about what options they might have to compulsorily acquire your land. I think I want to understand that more. And it's a question, can we just note that for a proper answer by way of understanding the Tauranga City Council's position on that? Whether or not the statutory supervisors have changed that or not, I don't know. I think we should find out and respond to you on that, Rawiri.
Another question from Rawiri as well in regard to potential of acquiring surplus land from Tauranga City Council. This land would be of general title. Would the trustees then look to seek the land changed into whenua Māori or keep it in general? Probably take that as a feedback one.
A feedback question, or if trustees want to talk about that. If you got land back by way of an exchange, would you see do you have a preference to turn that back into Māori land or keep it as general land? I suppose it would depend on where the land is.
I think that would be a direction from the court.
That's a tricky one.
It may be a requirement.
So there is
Can it be turned into Māori land?
So under if this was going to be done under what we call a Section 310 exchange, one of the provisions in that section under exchange orders is that the land you get back actually be vested as Māori freehold land. So it's definitely the preferred option for under Te Ture Whenua Māori. I guess I would just off the top of my head, we do have to look at where the land might be. Sometimes if you have land in a commercial centre, having that as Māori land can have implications for you. All of that would have to be worked through. But I'm hearing you guys have a preference, where possible, for gaining land and for having land held as Māori freehold land.
Kia ora, Rawiri. There's another important thing to consider here, and is that the land falls in an area that was Te Arawa land. We don't want to step on the toes of anybody, especially from Ngaiterangi. And so the area that has been mentioned, it falls within what was the Papamoa number 1 block, which was on this side of the mouth of the Wairake stream. So that's another angle to bring into it. I would be personally loath that we were picking up land that had no connection with us as a group of hapu.
That's it.
The next question is from Vincent Teote. Might be that you're slightly conflicted here, Leo, but the question is, who appointed you, Leo? Are you independent advisor, and who are you paid by?
Oh, I'm happy to answer that, Vincent. Who appointed me? So the trustees approached me to provide advice and assistance, both in terms of facilitating these hui and legal advice, and that occurred. I got involved about November last year. I through seeking funding opportunities for that and not wanting to incur costs for the trust, we arranged with Tauranga City Council that there be a fund available to provide assistance to this trust for legal advice. So there is no costs falling on owners at this point. If there is going to be any of those costs, I work on a really transparent basis and we'll make sure we tell you. Am I independent? I've got no connection at all to the whenua or any of the owners, as far as I know. Independent in the sense of providing advice to the trust going forward, and I hope that will be of value to them. And their intention is that I keep on facilitating these hui. As I said, one of the feedback questions that we are interested in is how we engage and engage well. So feedback on my work today and those sort of matters are invited as well. And I want to improve and provide as best a service that I can to you all.
Hui tā Leo, ko te mea hoki ka tino ka riro I te Tarati Day, te tihi roia e moe wana ki te kororo Māori. Kororo pai I te reo pāhea, kororo pai I te reo Māori. Ua wai maria katoa te Tarati aia.
Next question is from Warner Morgan. Why do the trustees give themselves unclaimed shares? Question mark.
Do that.
I'm just hearing from them, Moana, that hasn't happened and it would be unlawful. So if you want to provide further details of a query you have, we can answer that. Kia ora.
A question from James Manley. The vote on poll vote or one vote per owner and whānau trust? Something for further consideration? Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to have a look at that one, Leo, from Georgina? Summing it up. Quite a bit there again, Georgina. I think the concern is around the environmental impacts.
There's two aspects to Georgina's question there. Again, we'll respond in writing, Georgina. We've dealt with the other options, including the bridge, and your environmental, ecological considerations are hugely important, and that's what I saw as one of the trustee principles as well, both in terms of your awa and other sites of significance. So thank you for that.
Right. Getting through the questions there, whānau. Around about 18, 19 left. Karen Stowers, has the trust already filed an application to reduce the trustees to 6?
No, the application I was talking about, Karen, was the order in 2018 that the trustees are 6. The court has received an application under Section 45 of Te Ture Whenua Māori, which I haven't been involved with, but was seeking clarification from Judge Cox's decision around the appointment of the trustees and the election process. My advice to the trustees has been, while that process can take place, it's appropriate that this engagement hui start afresh and seek a trustee election and rotation policy that can be put forward. And just reminding us all again that many of the comments have wanted that to be a priority before development options. So that's something that has come through loud and clear as part of this hui and needs to be provided by way of feedback to you.
Next question from Paula Maxwell. Given we only have 2% of owners engaged in this current hui, what steps have been made to engage with the other 90% of the owners?
Do you want to respond?
And I might be able to sort of give some context to this one here, Paula. Out of the, say, 5,500 owners with the Māori Land Court, the trust has address details for about 1,000 of them, and email address details for about 500 of them. So we do send notices out. We do try and engage as best as possible with the new Facebook website platforms. We're trying to engage in a more sort of, or trust trying to engage in a more modern way, but it's really hard to get direct feedback and engagement from all our owners. And I think the best that we can do is ask that you as owners who are engaged in this process is to encourage your other whānau members to participate as best as possible. Question from Violet Waiariki. Can we have an indication from trustees if they intend to restand or retire, and also the current trustees are also shareholders? I think it might be premature.
So, well, it may be premature, but trustees, there's a question there. Do you intend to retire and restand? I don't want to cut across you. Each of you may.
There's only 2 would be.
Yep, the proposal is that 2 would retire and then rotate that over the course of time. Yep. I think my suggestion there would be that we don't need to be asking each individual trustee if they're going to restand or not. That would be a personal decision they would be working through in due course. But the proposal is that they would be eligible to stand again. And of course, whether they get on again would be open to the election by owners. All right. Thanks, Alex.
Next question from Taira. The existing trustee should, we do need a refresh of our trust. The existing trustee should be able to stay as advisors to ensure existing knowledge is retained. Please comment.
Okay, so Taira, that's an idea. As when you have people standing down, you can have them stay around as advisory trustees. So thank you for that. I think the proposal that's put forward is a rotational proposal over time to try and achieve the benefits that you're talking about, which is that continuity of knowledge. But thanks for that option. Yep. I'm just conscious of time, Alex, so keep going fast. 12:35.
Sally Williams, when is the next trustee election?
All right, so we've dealt with that.
Dealt with that one. Taira, our trust requires independent advisors. Can the trustees not see that Mr. Fletcher is conflicted?
The conflict of interest has been dealt with.
Dealt with that one. Irene Kiriona, trustee nominations eligibility mandatory that you must be an owner.
Must be an owner to be a trustee. Trustees are nodding there, Nyreen, and it could be as an explicit part of the trust order. One of the questions I would just raise as part of a discussion is that once you say you have to be an owner, sometimes an owner can be unwell or not have the mental capacity, for instance, to be able to participate as a trustee and yet still be an owner, and members of their whānau or their children could be really great contributors to the trust. So I think we have to be careful about how you define owner. If by that you're meaning a beneficiary of the trust, an uri of the trust, that would be, I think, a safer way of going to make sure you get the best range of people who could stand as trustees. But thank you for that. I'll just deal with Taira's next one. Can you commit to independent advisors that we have trust and confidence in? So certainly that's an important principle. Is this operable after 16 years without an AGM? I think there has been an AGM recently. There needs to be another AGM. So I don't know if that anonymous attendee comment is accurate. So Patricia's comment around, sorry, just taking you over there, Alex, I'll just whip them through if we can. The huge financial commitment that she's concerned about, the fact that it's up to $2.5 million and why. Patricia will answer that with some details in writing for you. Obviously, you've got to spend $1 to make $1 in the sense of preparing the trust for the options that might benefit you all. But specific questions about money, we'll come back to you on that. Will there be new trustees before any consultation? So again, the whole question of priority, I'm not going to go over that again. Kaituna is in front of the Waitangi Tribunal MACA hearings. What's the current trustees' view on that? Anyone want to comment about the MACA hearings? The Takutai Moana.
Oh, that has been settled, you know.
Do you want to speak into the microphone and give your thoughts?
Are you up to date?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Yes, the Tumu Kaituna land was determined as being no man's land in that no iwi or hapu had specific claims over our foreshore, and it remains so at this stage.
There's a question from Karen about other Māori land blocks, 7B1, 7B2, 8B1, 11B2. And there are other questions too that I see further down the list, the idea that you should be working collectively with those other Māori land blocks as well. So, Pirihira, yep.
Those individual land blocks must make their own trustees either negotiate with us. The fact that we are the bigger land mass, it's up to those selective groups to make their decisions. It's not for us to make the decisions for them.
I think the question then too is about how to, if they did want to work collectively with you, would you be open to that?
Yes.
Well, yes, of course we are.
Yes, we have invited them.
We have invited them.
All right. Have the trustees considered a site visit for owners to point out historical sites? So a suggestion there of feedback that we could look at right, kia ora. Thank you, Paura. There's some feedback there on Māori focused schooling, healthcare, shopping centres, and so great feedback there, Rawiri. New trustees, Nyreen, you're asking the question of priority of we've dealt with. Taira, Leo has his costs covered by TCC. Can TCC fund other independent advisors? So great question, Taira. Yes, we, for instance, are putting forward proposals whereby TCC be invited to consider how can the trust get good advice at TCC cost to get the best way forward. An example of that, for instance, is a valuer. To have the idea of a really top-notch valuer is important, how TCC can contribute to those sort of costs. And this is actually quite common within the public works context, where requiring authorities do contribute to landowner costs. So the short answer to you, Taira, is yes.
Can I say to that, Leo, as well?
Please.
These other costs like the social media and some of the digital interaction. The Tauranga City Council have also provided funding to help the trust get in that space there. So that's some of the funding, other funding that the trust has been able to source.
Do you want to just deal with a question that might be underlying on that, this idea of capture? Are the trustees able to confirm to owners that because TCC is paying for some of these advisors, does that mean that you're captured by TCC and do whatever they're bidding, or are you standing independently of that?
Absolutely independent, yeah.
We can't make decisions for TCC.
No. And vice versa.
And vice versa.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, but the offers are appreciated.
A generous offer.
All right, Levi, the selection process regarding 7 years, is it set in stone or up for debate? It's up for debate. Hunia, we need to be aware that there has never been a settlement of equity between councils, governments, te waka kotahi, that's NZTA and the like. Do the trustees accept that in an exchange of lands, surplus lands, compensation and partnership are in favour of the owners and not in favour of the council? Totally. So as part of your question, Hunia, about the background to land alienation and all the effects that has happened to your rohe, we're looking to look at if negotiations were to take place around land exchange, there needs to be a consideration of the broader cultural impacts historically and current that go into valuation rather than just a straight market assessment. I think that's really important. You talk about equity, absolutely. And just a mihi from Rawiri, tēnā koe. Georgina, are trustees supportive of owners partitioning out their shares from TK14? So that's a question for trustees to consider. Trustees may have different views on that, but what if owners came to you and wanted to partition out and have their own block separate from TK14?
Well, we have made it quite clear in the past that we need to keep the block together for development in the future for the greater good of all of the shareholders, because it would be hard to get an equitable division of certain private spaces on the land. They'll all want to be on the waterfront or something, whereas they could be back on the river. So it's easier to keep all of the parcels together, the shareholding in one, under the trust.
Te whakaaro ana? Kia ora, Malcolm.
Nā wai te kōrero nei, nā Rawiri.
Georgina.
Kia ora, Georgina. Historically, partitioning leads to alienation. The more partitioning goes on, the more alienation occurs. The other thing too is partitioning becomes very difficult when you look historically at this particular block. The fact that it's an amalgamation of 3 blocks, and I would see the issues over where the partitioning would happen to be so lengthy and so costly that there's has to be a better way of doing it as a unified group. Partitioning really should only be considered, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but partitioning means that you get complete ownership over it, including the right to sell on. And personally, I consider the selling of Māori land not acceptable. And I would prefer that people look at being involved with everybody else in housing that may be subsidized in some way, that if they really want to have ownership that's complete, that they are able to accrue the money to do that on general land. But that's a personal opinion, and we haven't discussed it, but that's where I stand on that issue.
Kia ora. I'm going to just close questions off in the next three now that are here so that we can have, and any questions that flow after that, including during our karakia and final comments, can be dealt with in writing. Patricia, just note that you're disappointed that the question around the funding wasn't addressed properly. You're mentioning that there was an increase in funding that the trust has spent up to the 2.8 million. My apologies if I had misinterpreted that. I have committed to you around the financial aspects that will provide that answer to you in writing, and will do so. Jeff, you raise a question around how to ensure that the housing on the land can accommodate the mix of needs of our people across the board in an affordable and sustainable manner. So thank you for that feedback, and hopefully the principles that the trustees put forward give you some comfort, but they really need to be drilled down. So just to remind you all that there's an application for feasibility around housing, and part of that work needs to deal with the sort of thing that you're dealing with there, Jeff, in terms of those questions. And that the final question here from Georgina, you mentioned Tumu Kaituna 7B have partitioned their shares out and have not alienated. So there's some feedback I see coming on chat too, where different people have different perspectives on whether partitioning is appropriate or not. Obviously, that would be a matter ultimately for the Māori Land Court to receive applications for partitioning. And so the final question here from Nairene Unuku, to use whenua as leverage for eroding is considered to be alienation. How do you justify that, saying that comment in terms of your comment about partitioning? And so the idea of an alienation of the land for the eroding purposes versus your concerns around alienation generally because of partitioning. Do you want to respond to that?
Well, my response to that would be that out of those possible avenues for getting the infrastructure in place, it would be the one that is the furthest from alienation as possible.
So I'm just going to close those questions there as the chair. I think we've tried our very best to work through these questions, but there are a number there that haven't been answered in full. We will do so in writing. And I'm just going to deal with the next steps slide if I can. Can we go back to the PowerPoint, please? So the next steps that are proposed are to put this presentation up on the TK14 website, and I would add, along with answers to questions that have been raised. Kia ora. We seek owner input and feedback via the website, via the Facebook page, or directly to the trustees. So particularly seeking feedback on the guiding principles and the election proposals. Seeking feedback on the infrastructure corridors and the active reserve options. And I would add to that, seeking feedback on how we are engaging with you as well. Engage with, inform and obtain your feedback. Now, this is really critical that you alert us to your changes of address, that you take the steps to and get involved as many of you have through this process. But as you've noted, this is only a small percentage of actively engaged owners. And so I put the challenge back to you all, including trustees and owners. What are you going to do now to make sure that members of your whānau who are not engaged have their say on this hugely important take? Because this is going to set a vision for 50, 100 years in the future and longer. So there is a degree of history, of mistrust, of cynicism from a number of owners here on the call. Whether that's a majority or minority of owners is not for me to say. I can assure you that that's been heard. But we're also getting really positive feedback through the chat around these options and the engagement and the desire to be involved. So a challenge for all of us, I think, is to trust that this can be a clean slate, trust that this process is genuine and that your feedback has been taken into account, and then put forward really viable alternatives. Put forward ideas that you think are either consistent with what the trustees want to see or alternatives that you've thought about. And I can assure you that the trustees will be taking that actively into consideration and bringing that back to further engagement hui with you. We're going to seek direct owner participation in the proposed upcoming hui. So how that is going to happen depends a little bit on the COVID environment. But rather than this presentation format, which is simply talking to you and you're only able to feedback in writing, we're going to look at other ways in which we can encourage your participation as well. So feedback on that would be good as well. Once that engagement hui takes place, as the same, we're thinking that there would be another 3 of these processes. So there's plenty of time to provide your feedback and get involved. There will be formal resolutions which are crafted as a result of these discussions, and those resolutions will go out to you all formally notified, and a proper hui would be called to actually deal with those resolutions, as well as I say, the preference is to have a postal vote running alongside that to get as big a coverage or wider coverage of owners as the trustees can. And then based on those voting preferences, if the owners wish to proceed with development options that might require applications to the Māori Land Court, further negotiations with the council, there's so much water to go under the proverbial bridge, and we're just at the start of that journey now. What's the next slide? That's us. So it just requires me now to thank you all for your participation and constructively providing your feedback. My thanks to the electronic team behind us and the advisors. My particular thanks to the trustees, the 6 of you, for participating and providing your responses and being so open to this feedback. Can I ask our kaumātua to close our hui, please, Waldo? Tēnā hui.
Koutou mai, mena kei te whakarongo tonu mai koutou. Re tuata te tuku mihi atu no kia koutou. Moa koutou pātai. Kia rongorongo mai i koutou ngā mea o mātou. Kau atu e pupuri ana tēnei rākau. Ki tā koutou e hihi e tā mātou e whakatatūne. Nā reira, tēnā wātu koutou, me taku mihi ki te hara mai o tēnei rangatira. Mau kāre mātou i tīmata me te roa ia pērā i aiara. He maha hoki ngā kaupapa ko wānanga ngea ka mātou, mau kāre i kone i te rawa. Nā e mihi atu anau ki a koe lio, nau mai hara mai. Ka nui te me. Me tēnei anō hoki koutou, tātou. Nā reira, ki ino no tātou e te mangalo e tuku whakamomiti atu ana. Whakawhetai atu no ki a koe. Nā au i tuku mai tō wairua ki roto i a mātou. I eke e ngā kaupapa i whakautu ngā atu nei i tōna teiteitanga. I runga te matua, te tamatu wairua tapu. Amen. Amen.